It started with a bruise. A small, circular discoloration on my forearm, dark like an ink stain beneath the skin. I noticed it one morning while brushing my teeth, and at first I thought nothing of it. Maybe I had bumped into something the day before. Maybe it was just one of those weird marks the body makes when you're not paying attention. I should have paid attention. By the second morning, the bruise had grown. It had deepened into a purplish-black ring, its edges uneven, like something had pressed into my skin with force. I tried to remember if I had fallen, hit my arm against something in my sleep, but nothing made sense. I lived alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. My days were monotonous. Wake up, go to work, come home, eat, sleep, repeat. But something had changed. I just didn't know it yet. That night, I went to bed feeling uneasy, my fingers brushing over the strange mark on my arm. It was tender, almost hot to the touch. As I lay in bed, I kept the lamp on, staring at the ceiling, listening. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe the creak of an unseen presence, a shadow moving at the edge of my vision. But all I heard was the wind against my window. At some point, I drifted off, and then I woke up. I didn't remember hearing a sound, didn't feel the usual sluggishness of being jolted out of sleep. I simply opened my eyes and found myself staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding for no reason. The air felt wrong, thicker, heavy, like the pressure had changed in the room. Then I felt it, a cold touch, light as a whisper trailing over my wrist. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, my body paralyzed with a fear I couldn't understand. I couldn't see anything, couldn't move, but I felt it, an invisible hand grazing over my skin, slow and deliberate like it was marking me. And then it was gone. I don't know how long I lay there, my body drenched in cold sweat, heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't dare turn on the light. I didn't even move. I just lay there, listening to the silence, waiting for something to reach out again. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I slipped back into unconsciousness. The next morning, the first thing I did was check my arm. The bruise had spread. The circular mark was larger now, its edges more defined, almost perfectly symmetrical. The skin around it was raised, irritated, as if something had branded me during the night. I ran my fingers over it, shivering at how sore it was. Panic crawled up my throat. I took a shower, scrubbing my skin raw, but the mark wouldn't fade. It wasn't a normal bruise. It felt deeper. I called in sick to work. The whole day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My apartment felt smaller, suffocating, the shadows and the corners darker than they should be. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined that unseen hand brushing against me again, its fingers cold and deliberate. By evening, I had convinced myself that I was imagining things. Stress, maybe. A bad dream I had mistaken for reality. I went to bed with the lights on, and I woke up with another mark. This time it was on my thigh. A perfect circle, identical to the one on my arm. And worse, I couldn't remember falling asleep. I didn't sleep at all the next night. I sat up in bed, eyes wide, ears straining for the slightest sound. My apartment was silent, oppressively so, like the walls were holding their breath. Around 2 a.m., the air changed. It was subtle at first, a shift in temperature. My skin prickled, an icy sensation creeping over my arms, my legs. And then a whisper, right next to my ear. I snapped my head around, my pulse spiking, but there was nothing there. I scrambled out of bed, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The room felt wrong, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. I turned on every light, pacing back and forth, trying to convince myself I was losing my mind. But then I saw it, a shadow, not on the wall, not in the corner, but on my ceiling. It was faint, distorted, like a reflection in rippling water. But it was there, stretching across the white plaster, watching me. I didn't move, didn't blink, and then it moved. I don't remember screaming, but my throat was raw by the time I stumbled out of my apartment, not stopping until I was in my car, hands shaking so violently I could barely grip the steering wheel. I drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds, expecting to see something lurking in the back seat. I ended up in a motel on the other side of town. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the handle, and left every single light on. I didn't sleep, but when the sun rose, I pulled on my sleeve, and there it was. A third mark. This one was larger, darker, and for the first time, I realized what they were. Fingerprints. Something was grabbing me at night, and I had no way to stop it. I sat in a motel room for hours, my back pressed against the headboard, my fingers shaking as I traced the newest mark on my skin. It was bigger this time, the discoloration darker, almost ink black against my pale skin. But now I knew what it was. Fingerprints. I ran to the bathroom mirror and examined the mark under the fluorescent light. The shape, the pattern, it wasn't random bruising. It was a handprint, but not a normal one. The fingers were too long, the pressure uneven, as if whatever had grabbed me had only half existed in the moment of contact. A cold shudder racked my body. I didn't know what scared me more, the fact that something had touched me or the fact that I hadn't felt it happen. I tried to stay rational. Maybe it was sleep paralysis. Maybe I was having some kind of night terror, so vivid my body was manifesting the trauma physically. But even as I thought it, I knew I was lying to myself. I had been awake. I had seen the shadow on my ceiling move. And now, I had proof that it wasn't just in my head. I didn't go back to my apartment that day. Instead, I drove. For hours, I just kept moving, stopping only to buy coffee and splash cold water on my face in gas station bathrooms. I told myself if I could just stay awake, it wouldn't happen again. But exhaustion is cruel. By the time evening came, I was running on fumes. My body ached, my eyelids felt like lead, and my thoughts were starting to blur together. I ended up in another motel, this one even more run down than the last. The wallpaper was peeling, the carpet smelled damp, and the flickering yellow light in the bathroom barely stayed on. But I didn't care. I just needed to stay awake. I turned on every single light, positioned myself in the chair by the window, and pulled out my phone. If I could distract myself, keep my mind occupied, maybe I could push through the night without I woke up in bed. The realization was instant and horrifying. I hadn't even remembered closing my eyes. 1 second, I had been in the chair, my phone in my hands. The next, I was lying in bed, the covers pulled up to my chest. My heart slammed against my ribs as I scrambled upright, gasping for breath. No. I threw the blankets off and checked my arms. The bruises were still there. Then I pulled up my shirt. Another one, this time on my stomach. A dark, oval mark, as if a hand had been pressed against me. I could almost make out the individual fingers, their tips blurred but unmistakable. My head swam. It was getting worse. I staggered toward the motel bathroom, gripping the sink for balance. My stomach churned as I stared at my reflection. I looked like a corpse. Dark circles carved hollows under my eyes. My skin was pale, clammy. I turned the faucet on and splashed water on my face, gripping the counter to steady my shaking hands. Then I heard it, a soft shuffle, somewhere beyond the door. I froze, my breath hitching. The sound came again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving just outside my motel room. I turned off the faucet, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped. For several seconds, there was nothing but silence. Then knock, knock, knock. A slow, deliberate tapping against my door. My pulse spiked. I backed away from the sink, my hands trembling. Then the doorknob rattled. My lungs seized. Something was trying to get in. I moved without thinking, grabbing my phone and stepping as quietly as I could toward the door. The knob twisted again, jerking slightly like someone was testing the lock. Then silence. I held my breath, pressing my back against the wall. Seconds stretched into an eternity. And then, just as I thought it was over, a whisper, right outside the door. "Let me in." My stomach dropped. The voice was wrong. Too thin, too fragile, like the sound of dry leaves crumbling underfoot. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then the footsteps faded. I waited 10 whole minutes before I dared to move. When I finally opened the door, the hallway was empty. But there was something on the floor. A handprint, smudged across the faded motel carpet. The same size and shape as the bruises on my body. It had been inside the room with me. I don't remember leaving the motel. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in my car, parked outside an all-night diner miles away. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. My heart was still racing. I looked down at my phone. I had no missed calls, no messages. Had I been sleepwalking? My body was exhausted, every muscle sore, my skin burning where the new mark had formed. My mind felt foggy, like I had lost time. I couldn't do this anymore. I needed help. I opened my phone and did something I never thought I would do. I called my sister. Mia answered on the second ring. "Jesus, Evan, do you have any idea what time it is?" Her voice was groggy, tinged with irritation. "I need to stay with you," I said, my voice shaking. "Please, I can't be alone right now." There was a pause. Then, concern replaced her annoyance. "Evan, what's wrong?" I didn't know where to start, so I told her everything. The bruises, the waking nightmares, the whispers in the night. I expected her to call me crazy, to tell me I was overreacting, but she didn't. Instead, her voice got quiet. "Come over," she said. I didn't waste time. Mia lived across town in a small house she had inherited from our grandmother. It was old but cozy, a place that always felt safe when we were kids. I reached her place just after 3 a.m. She was waiting at the door, wrapped in a robe, her expression tight with worry. She let me in without a word, locking the door behind me. I didn't realize I was crying until she pulled me into a hug. Whatever was happening, whatever had marked me, I wasn't alone anymore. Or so I thought, because as I stepped into her house, as the warmth of familiarity settled over me, the lights flickered. And just for a second, I saw it. A shadow, not outside, not in the corners, but standing behind Mia, watching me, waiting. And the moment the lights flickered back on, it was gone. Mia made me tea. She always did that when I was stressed, like when we were kids, and I had nightmares about the dark space under my bed. She never believed in ghosts or the supernatural, but she believed me. Or at least, she wanted to. We sat at her kitchen table, the dim light of a single bulb humming above us. I told her everything, every strange occurrence, every mark on my skin, the whispers, the handprint outside my motel door. And she listened. Mia never interrupted, but I could tell by the way she kept glancing at my arms, at my face, that she was disturbed. "You're exhausted," she finally said. "You need real sleep. You haven't been able to rest properly in, what, days?" I rubbed my temples. "I don't think it'll let me sleep." Mia was quiet for a long time. Then she stood up and grabbed a notepad from the counter. "Let's write everything down," she said. I frowned. "Why?" "Because you're losing time. Maybe if we keep track, we can figure out what's happening. What's real?" She wasn't wrong. I had no memory of falling asleep in the motel. No memory of leaving. No memory of how I got in my car. Maybe if we tracked everything, I could regain some control. So we started writing. She asked me everything when the marks first appeared, how many there were, where I had been every night since they started. Then she looked up at me and said something that sent a chill through my spine. "Show me the new one." I hesitated. Slowly, I lifted my shirt. Mia leaned in, her expression shifting from concern to something else. She reached out and traced her fingers over the dark mark on my ribs. Then, very softly, she whispered, "This isn't a bruise." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" She swallowed hard. "Evan, this isn't just a normal handprint." She stood up and rummaged through one of her drawers, pulling out a small flashlight. Then she turned off the kitchen light and shined the beam directly onto my skin. My breath hitched. The mark wasn't just a stain. It had ridges, patterns, like a burned scar that had been pressed into me. Mia turned the light back on. Her face had gone pale. She had seen what I had seen. "This isn't normal," she whispered. I knew that already. But hearing someone else say it, admitting it was real, made it worse. That night, Mia insisted I sleep in the guest room. "You're safe here," she said. I wanted to believe her, but deep down I knew it wasn't true. I lay in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling. The house was old but quiet. No humming pipes, no rattling windows. But at 2:47 a.m., something changed. I heard scratching. At first, it was soft, faint. Then scrape, 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 it grew louder. I sat up. It was coming from the walls. I turned on the lamp. The sound stopped. The silence was thick, suffocating. My pulse pounded in my ears as I got out of bed and stepped toward the wall. I pressed my palm against it. The wood felt ice cold. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it. Then, thump, from inside the wall. I jerked back, my breath catching in my throat. The sound came again. A dull, heavy thud. Something was inside the walls. I stumbled back toward the bed, grabbing my phone with trembling fingers. And that's when I noticed something horrifying. The door was open. I knew I had closed it. I knew I had locked it. But now it was open just an inch, like someone had peeked in. A cold, heavy feeling crept over me. And then the whisper. It came from the dark hallway. It knew my name. Evan. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The whisper came again. Closer. "Let me in." I slammed the door shut and locked it, pressing my weight against it as my heart nearly exploded in my chest. The whisper stopped, but the scratching in the walls started again. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to Mia screaming. I bolted upright. My door was still locked. But outside, in the hallway, I heard her voice raw, terrified. I threw the door open and ran toward her room. Mia was standing by the wall, clutching her arm. Her eyes were wide, panicked, her face drained of color. and on the wall beside her were claw marks, deep, jagged gashes in the wood. Her hands were shaking as she lifted her sleeve, and there, on her skin, was a mark. Not a bruise, not a burn, a handprint. I felt sick. It wasn't just after me anymore. It had touched her, too. Mia, and I didn't speak as we packed our bags. By the time the sun came up, we were already getting ready to leave. But as we grabbed our things, I noticed something strange in the hallway. A small square in the ceiling, an attic hatch, and around the edges was scratching, like something had been pushing at it from inside. I looked at Mia. Her face had gone pale. There's no attic, she whispered. My blood turned to ice. The house had no attic, but the hatch was there, and something had been trying to get out. The attic wasn't supposed to exist. Mia and I stood frozen in the dim hallway, staring up at the hatch in the ceiling. A door to nowhere. The house was small, one floor. No second level, no storage space above. But the wooden frame of the hatch looked old, like it had been there long before Mia ever lived here. And around the edges, the deep, jagged scratches. Something had been trying to get out. Mia swallowed hard. We have to leave. Now. I nodded. We grabbed our bags and rushed to the front door. But when I reached for the handle, my stomach dropped. The door wouldn't open. The lock turned freely, but the door itself wouldn't budge, like something was holding it shut from the other side. Mia's breathing grew sharp. "Try the back door," she whispered. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the handle. Locked. I twisted the bolt. Nothing. It was like the entire house had sealed itself shut. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Then, from behind me, a soft creak. I turned, my pulse hammering. The hallway closet was open. Just an inch. It had been closed seconds ago. Mia, my voice came out hoarse. She stepped into the kitchen, still clutching her bag. I pointed at the door. She shook her head. I didn't open that. The air grew thick, heavy. Mia took a step back. Then the whisper, right behind the closet door. "Evan!" Mia screamed. I grabbed her wrist and ran. With no way out, we had one last option. The attic. It didn't make sense, but neither did anything else. If something had been trying to get out, maybe we could find a way through. The ceiling hatch had no ladder, no pull string. It was just there. How the hell do we get up there? Mia whispered. I looked around frantically. The hallway closet. I opened it. Inside was a small step ladder. Mia went rigid. I never put that there. Neither of us moved. Neither of us breathed. Then something shifted inside the closet. A low, rustling sound, like breath against wood. I yanked the ladder out and slammed the closet shut. "Go," Mia said. "Just go." I set the ladder beneath the hatch and climbed. With a deep breath, I pushed against the wooden panel. It gave way instantly. Dust and stale air spilled over me as I peered inside. A black void. No insulation. No wood beams. Just an open space that shouldn't exist. Mia climbed up behind me. Oh my God, the space was too big. It stretched far beyond the house's walls, like we were staring into a place that had been hidden for years. Then something moved inside. Mia grabbed my arm. In the blackness, a shape was shifting. At first, it looked like a bundle of fabric, shifting in the dust. Then it rose. My chest locked. It was a man-sized figure, crouched in the shadows. Bent wrong. Its limbs were too thin, its fingers too long. Mia clapped a hand over her mouth, choking down a scream. The figure lurched forward, and I saw its face. No eyes, just a mouth, a black, gaping maw that split its face from cheek to cheek. My body locked. It spoke. Evan. A whisper. My whisper. I kicked the ladder over and yanked Mia away. We collapsed onto the floor as the attic hatch slammed shut. Everything went silent. The door unlocked itself. We ran. We didn't stop. Not when we got to the car, not when we sped down the empty road. But as we drove, Mia suddenly gasped. I looked over and my stomach dropped. A fresh handprint was appearing on her neck. I slammed the brakes. Her skin was indentating, as if invisible fingers were pressing into her throat. She choked. I grabbed her shoulders. Mia, look at me. She couldn't breathe. Her eyes rolled back, and then, just as suddenly, it stopped. She gasped, sobbing for air. The handprint was still there. Darker now. We left town that night. We didn't go back for our things. We didn't speak of it again. But weeks later, I woke up in my new apartment. Something felt off. My skin was prickling. I turned on the light. And there, on the wall, deep, fresh scratches. I turned to the mirror, pulled up my shirt, and saw the newest mark on my skin. But this time, it wasn't a handprint. It was a name. My own, etched in my ribs. A fresh, burning scar, like something had claimed me. And in the silence of my room, I heard it. That same soft whisper. Evan, the voice that knew my name. It found me again. And this time, it wasn't going to let me go.